So good morning to everybody here, speakers, audience, and esteemed guests. Good morning, sir. This is Deepak Jacob here. I hope you can hear
Good
me.
morning.
Yeah.
I can. Okay.
Thank you so much for taking time out. You're the man in the hot seat. Ministry of Electronics and IT is making the front page news, the last page, the middle page on multiple topics. So I'm just going to quickly allow you to, I'm going to run this in the following manner. One is we need you to give some opening remarks to set context. I have about 3 or 4 big substantive questions around AI, semiconductors, etc. And then a set of rapid fire questions, just more lighthearted, your advice as a mentor to the industry. And then we're going to open it up to the audience for about 2 to 3 minutes. That's the way you're going to run it, sir. With your permission, can we please start, sir? Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. In terms of opening comments, let me first apologize for not being able to be present in person in Mumbai. To be honest, this was an invitation which came to me quite some time ago, and I was very keen to join in person. But reality being that we have a number of things which we are trying to catch up in these last few days before the model code of conduct comes into force, and therefore there are a number of initiatives which need to be looked at. And I'm unable to travel, so I apologize for my inability to be present in person in Mumbai. But let me again emphasize that this event, which combines both the digital summit, which combines the Internet and Mobile Association of India, which is one of the oldest associations in the sphere. And in a sense, most of India accesses the internet through their mobile phones. So I think in that sense, the digital experience in India is primarily an experience based on mobile phones, mobile telephony, and those kind of linkages as opposed to the conventional computers and laptops and other desktop-oriented instruments. That being the case, I think you are all very, very key players in this sector. And we expect the digital economy to really grow at 20% plus in the next few years. And currently, it's at about $350 billion, if you give or take a bit, in terms of where we stand on software and the ITES sector, and where we stand on the electronics manufacturing sector, which is about $100 billion. So both put together, we are talking a number of about $350 billion overall size. And we need that to grow fairly rapidly to about $1 trillion. $1 trillion digital economy is what India is seriously looking at. And that would end up being at least 20% of the $5 trillion economy goal that the Honorable Prime Minister has set. That being the case, and this is just in the way that we count the digital economy, technology, digital technology impacts all other elements of the economy as well, whether it is agriculture, whether it is manufacturing, and various other forms of service delivery. So if you look at it as a contribution of technology to the economy, it's going to be significantly larger. And the combination of emerging technology, which can be increasingly applied to multiple sectors, means that the possibility of India further leapfrogging in the development path is something that we should factor in over the next 5 to 10 years. Many experts have said that with artificial intelligence and the use of, and we are just literally at the fringes of what the artificial intelligence revolution can offer, with AI, with various other newer forms of emerging technology, including quantum computing, robotics, and so on, productivity gains in the economy can be very, very significant. They have, in fact, been compared to what the first round of the Industrial Revolution did for economies in the West in the 19th century. And our opportunity is similar to that. We have the talent pool, we have the ability to actually take advantage of this. There are certain other key factors that we need to put in for it to happen. Uh, Clearly, we need to, in the electronics manufacturing space itself, we need a much more resilient supply chain for various historic reasons. I'm not finding fault or anything of that nature, but electronics manufacture itself declined post the ITA in 1997, and many Indian companies who were in electronics manufacturing went out of business, but now there is a significant revival. Um, at that point, possibly the calculation was that availability of the latest hardware devices was important to take advantage of the software revolution, the ITES revolution, and certainly India did take advantage of it. Now we are back to the full circle, and we want that electronics manufacture should take place in the country itself, both for geopolitical reasons and for the experience of the COVID pandemic and all else. We need a resilient supply chain, and this is true not just in India but across the globe. And many other countries also back India to be part of that global value chain in electronics manufacture. So that is an important opportunity that we need to look at. And there's been significant growth in that direction. Today, when we speak of mobile phones, for instance, 99.2% of mobile phones, especially smartphones, which are sold in India, are made in India. This is something the Honorable Prime Minister also very proudly announced. What we need to do also is to increase the value addition that takes place within India in the mobile phone space. And likewise, we also need to look at IT hardware manufacture and various other sectors. And those are initiatives which the government is seriously looking at. Likewise, in the AI segment, we really need to build up on the availability of compute infrastructure in India, which is in a sense holding us back, and we really need to work on that very seriously, and also build certain large multimedia models for India itself. Today's models tend to be built on Western databases and have inherent biases. Now we need to sort of see that given the volume of data that we have in India, we take advantage of that and start the process of building some of these models that can be done both in the private sector and by a number of academic and other institutions, and we are looking forward for that. Semiconductors is the other big space. We are already aware that Micron is building its facility in Gujarat. More companies are likely to crowd into the space, and I think that is a space to watch over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of how the build out happens. And we have an ecosystem in semiconductors which is local. And the advantage there is that there are so many components, so many materials which are needed. It can actually, the production of all those materials and components can lead to considerable enhancement of manufacturing, of the manufacturing sector within India. So I think there are big advantages there. We also need to recognize that the employment potential of all these sectors has been huge. We have about 4 to 5 million people who are in the software IT sector. We have close to 2 million people who are employed in the electronics manufacture sector, and that is likely to go up to about 4 to 5 million as well. These are good jobs. These are jobs which are constantly improving, both in the ITES sector, where we are moving from the traditional BPO model to higher value-added jobs as global capacity centers and so on, and even in the manufacturing sector. We should not scoff at the kind of employment that even the ESDM companies or EMS companies generate in terms of putting together the mobile phones. The largest factories in India today are factories which put together electronic components. I have myself visited many of them, and it's no joke that you have close to 50,000 people working in each of those factories. I think it's a huge achievement for India to actually have factories on that scale and have the attendant infrastructure and ecosystem to support it. There need to be more and more of those and more of those across the country. All of this is going to happen, and I think through the ITES sector, not only does the economy grow, but overall welfare also grows as more jobs are generated. I think this is what we are primarily looking at on the positive dimension as we emerge as a major electronics manufacturing destination, in addition to being a major ITES part. Let me end there and then go with any questions or go with any other exchanges that we need.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to pick up from one of the things that you mentioned, which is very important, which is IT and electronics manufacturing and skill development. One of the things that you recently spoke about was the need for growing innovation systems in India, and more specifically, you talked about IP for products designed in India, which should ideally be owned by companies in India. Now, I break down the internet and mobile segment into the software layer, the hardware layer, and then the telco infra layer or the mobile computing layer. Uh, and for example, an iPhone costs about USD $1,000. The cost of material, labor, and assembly is about $200. The remaining USD $800 goes back to Apple, for example, Apple or whichever foreign mobile company, and who owns the designs. How there's a value addition in the supply chain, which you talked about. In India, it ranges between 15 to 20%, which is clearly lower than most of the other leading economies, including China, where it ranges between 50 to 52% in terms of value addition. Uh, so you talked about the supply chain. That value addition needs to go up. So I think there's three questions I have. One is, how do you incentivize the ITES, mobile companies, etc., to share their IP, now whether it's through technology transfer, whether it's setting up manufacturing bases here, that's one question. How do you incentivize Indian entrepreneurs who are building, software and hardware to create and curate their own IP, which ultimately is owned by them? And the third leg to that is, how do we bridge the skill and capability gaps to enable the fostering of an indigenous design and development ecosystem in India for the internet and mobile economy? So it's three parts to that question, sir.
Okay, let me start with the last question first. See, if you look at, say, as an example of the electronic manufacturing sector, if you take the semiconductor segment alone, in the design element, India has possibly the second largest workforce which is engaged in design. There are about 20 to 25,000 semiconductor design engineers who work out of India. There are a large number of startups who do design. But the thing is that most of them work for fabless and other companies from overseas. I mean, if you look at either Bangalore or Hyderabad or any of these locations, the number of the office space which say a Qualcomm or a Broadcom occupies there is huge. Most of them are design engineers who are designing for these companies. In addition, there are a number of smaller design startups who actually design and supply to those larger companies. I
Right.
think the ability to take risks there, and when you try to develop the IP of your own and a product of your own, you have to be prepared to take a much higher level of risk. When you are a services company, and it's true both in, say, the semiconductor space or even in the IT services space. We want to be IT service companies. We don't want to be IT product companies because IT service companies find it easier to say, with a margin of 20, 30%, it's a steady margin. There are no risks involved. You're supplying to enterprises and the work just goes on. You take advantage of the cost arbitrage and so on. On the other hand, if you developed a product and you were trying to sell the product to the market, then you have a number of other risks. You could make huge margins, like we are talking about Apple right now, or any other such software or design. You could make huge margins, or you could just crash and burn. And so that is where I think the risk-taking ability and the risk-taking temperament really needs to pick up, and people need to sort of understand that we need to do products of our own. There are people who are doing products. Recently, we came up with this epic kind of it's a tablet, educational tablet, which has been done with Indian know-how, with Indian design, and everything else. So products of that nature are coming up, but we need more and more of those. So that is a space in which Indian industry, the private sector industry, needs to work with government. And we are trying to support them in a number of ways. For instance, an important component of the Indian semiconductor mission is the design linked incentive that we provide for software design, for the semiconductor design. Likewise, the Department of Telecom is now incentivizing designing routers and various other things for newer technologies for 5G and 6G. Most of it is again electronic. So, like that, there are a number of subsidy-oriented programs which helps the design side of this, and we speak to industry constantly to see what they need to enhance their presence on the design side. I think so. That is a change which is taking place, and I think a lot of it is realization within the industry also that as we grow in confidence, it is possible for us to take those bigger risks and do it on a scale which matters. So that is as far as the design part of it is concerned. As far as bringing in companies from overseas to invest in India, share some of the IP, and go forward, that is happening on an ongoing basis. I think there the critical thing is that India has to be a competitive destination for manufacture. That involves a number of efforts. We need to build an ecosystem. The state and central governments need to work together to make sure that there is adequate ease of doing business. We don't hold it up through lack of infrastructure or lack of regulatory clearances. All of those are spaces which we constantly work on to make sure that India continues to be very competitive in that segment. And logically from there we progress to how we can improve the overall value addition that can take place, say in the electronic segment. If China is around 50% today and we are between 15 and 20, at least we should aspire to getting to about 40% before in the next 4 to 5 years. And if we have to get to that 40%, we need certainly some support, and the government is prepared to do that. We are working on a program which will support incentivizing component manufacturing as opposed to the final assembly of products, looking to see whether component manufacture can actually take place, support that, support companies to establish more and more of their component manufacturing facilities here. And that is something we are supporting not just Indian manufacturers, but also foreign manufacturers who are trying to relocate the value chain from other countries for geopolitical reasons. So that is also another opportunity which is coming up. So it needs to be a mix. And when we are competitive not just for Indian manufacturers, we are competitive for foreign manufacturers also to relocate to India. And part of what we need to learn as IP and learn as skill and technology comes from there. One other aspect which you talked about, skilling, is really an interesting case. I mean, let's take again, go back to the semiconductor case. We have a large number of design engineers, but we don't have enough skills, say, in the actual semiconductor manufacture space. We have to really work on making sure how people work in a clean room, how they are able to manage the production of the chips, how they're able to manage the entire conditions there so that yield really goes up. Those are all challenges where we need to train more and more. Luckily, what you find and what we learn from some of the companies is we have people of Indian origin, Indians also, who have worked in many of these large companies like Intel, like Micron, like NVIDIA, any number of these companies all over the world, including Qualcomm, Broadcom. All of them have a large number of Indians who are also reaching near the top of those institutions. And many of those people are willing to come back to India and establish facilities to make sure that skilling actually takes place. And that's also been an area where we have collaborated quite closely with the private sector to improve the skilling opportunities.
Thank you, sir. Clearly, a couple of big takeaways there. I think Ministry of Electronics and IT being able to handhold the private sector, the foreign companies to navigate the complex Indian electronics manufacturing ecosystem is clearly a heartwarming, recommendation from you. I think Gar Wapasi is a great initiative, and I think if we can apply that to IT electronics manufacturing, like you said, sir, a lot of the Indian diaspora are now leading some of these global manufacturing giants. And yes, we'd love to have more of them back home. Moving on to the semiconductor initiatives in India. During Mumbai Tech Week, the Honorable MOS IT Shri Rajiv Chandrasekhar mentioned that there were $2 billion semiconductor plants that will be coming up in India soon. The government was also looking to set up the Indian Semiconductor Research Center, the ISRC, this year to catalyze talent development, R&D, and drive innovation. These efforts should enable India to propel to the forefront of the global semiconductor space and by extension, obviously, the AI ecosystem. Can you, uh, can you share some details around these semiconductor fabs and ISRCs, and how do you see these projects impacting India's position in the global value chains?
I think on the semiconductor new projects which will come up, you will hear fairly quickly. The minister did mention that, and you will hear more about it shortly. Let me leave that there because mentioning which company and where and how and things is beyond my pay grade at this point. But you will
Right, sir.
hear about it quickly. Um, that's the only thing that I can show you. As for the ISRC, this is an initiative that we are working on to make sure that the linkage between industry and academia and the government on one side needs to be really strong. Government is not taking, up there and up front kind of role. We want industry and academia to collaborate. There are a number of interesting models. There's IMEC out of Europe. There is also the kind of work that has been done at different locations in the US, including Albany, where IBM set up their initial facility, where a lot of people get trained. A lot of research happens in the semiconductor space. So we are looking to see how to engender that kind of an ecosystem. We are working with some companies already. We are working with companies to enable them to interact and tie up with the academic institutions for that to happen. Many institutions, including Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, IIM, IIT Bombay, all of them are tying up with a number of companies in a relationship which is very different from the way it used to be earlier. I think there's far greater openness amongst academic institutions to also do this. And interestingly, across the country, there are also a number of private institutions which are opening up to this in different parts of the country. And many companies are tying up with private institutions also to both support research activity in terms of developing products and creating a design workforce, and also to actually ensure that the talent is available for manufacture. The manufacture facility is something which again needs to be put together. There's also a very ambitious plan to refurbish and modernize the semiconductor laboratory SCL in Mohali, which will perform and which will start functioning more as a research facility and a kind of a training facility with some manufacture which is intended for strategic and other sectors. So all of this is in the anvil. So I guess in the next year and a half, we should see a number of interesting steps.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to AI, um, you had mentioned that Indian engineers already account for about 20% of the world's semiconductor design workforce. And uh, the statistics so far show that the India's AI market is growing at about a CAGR of about 25 to 35%, poised to reach about 17 billion by 2027. So while AI clearly holds immense socio-economic potential, we cannot ignore the unprecedented challenges it also presents. Last year, the Honorable Minister of State for IT, in fact, addressed the Global AI Safety Summit in UK and emphasized that the future of tech should be driven by a coalition of nations and not an individual nation. Considering this, what measures is MeitY looking at to ensure that AI is deployed in a responsible manner and that the interests of Indian citizens are not compromised while being able to optimize the potential of this revolutionary technology?
I think India's approach to AI tries to balance these two needs. On the one hand, innovation and the good that it can do, and on the other hand, protecting citizens and protecting society from the harms that can come out of AI. To some extent, we are at an advantage currently because there are, some moves in terms of legislating on regulating of AI, which has come out in the US in terms of the presidential executive order and in the European Union. There are also pieces of legislation in China and elsewhere. And we've had the advantage of looking at all of these while looking at what provisions we need to include in the Digital India Act, which hopefully should come out in the coming months. And that would address this issue to a considerable extent. We are learning all those lessons, we are absorbing those lessons. We are trying to make sure that we design a model which will balance both of these. Already, the DPDP Act, which came out, and which has an important role to play in AI as well, in terms of how personal data will get used and what kind of consent mechanisms are needed and how it needs to be anonymized and so on. And many companies, many members of industry have been quite struck by how it balances the um, the interest of privacy and the interest of security of individuals' data with how innovation can be fostered. So there is a fair amount of confidence that, in fact, there have been even European country leaders who have shared with us privately that we have struck a much better balance in the DPDP Act than what Europe did, what the EU did in the GDPR. So to that extent, I think we are on the right track in terms of the regulation. We are taking a little bit longer, both because we have the time frame and we didn't want to rush it at a time when we are going to go into this policy hiatus during the election time. But post that, I think we should be ready for a framework which will again be debated and discussed and brought out, which will address many of these concerns. I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to.
Thank you, sir.
And
Yes. Oh, sorry. Go
and
ahead, sir,
one other
please.
point which I'd like to make on the global role is that India has taken leadership in GPI. This year, as you're aware, in 2024, we are the GPI chair. And we are working very hard to strengthen the institution to make sure that it comes out of it comes out as an independent institution outside the control of a few countries or a few advanced countries, and is able to speak more with greater clarity and greater authority for the global south. So that is also an effort that we are currently in.
Thank you, sir. Yes, absolutely agree with you. I think between the government of India, MITI, you have been very calibrated, very measured, and pioneering in legislation, regulatory interventions, whether it's the DPDP or whether it's AI or crypto. I think we're clearly showing the world that we would like to take the lessons learned globally, but we have our own path, which is customized to our requirements and needs. Thank you very much, sir. I'm going to move on to some rapid fire questions. This is more off script, but I think I think the audience would love to hear, your quick points of view. Um, you're on the front page of the newspapers almost every day, sir. So one thing about the platform and digital economy that keeps you up at night, and one thing that excites you in terms of opportunities. Just a quick fire question.
To be honest, I'm not a technologist by training, and ideally, I'd like to be an anonymous civil servant. So some of these are hazards of the job. You get caught at different points in time. But as a civil servant, you really need to give it your best, learn, and try to learn on the job, not at the cost of the job, and get the kind of results that you want. So I think the learning curve is what really keeps me up at night.
Thank you, sir. Uh, Big tech has been at the forefront of the news, regulations, and otherwise. They're doing a great job in India, no doubt. They're deeply invested. They are customizing to the extent that the Indian audience requires them to serve. However, they are facing significant headwinds and challenges because they have a global point of view which is being sort of, you know, uh, imposed on the Indian audience. Now, what is your message to big tech uh, for the years ahead in terms of just some guidance that you have?
I think we enjoy a good relationship with big tech. I think what we see, it has matured as a relationship. Now now we can actually see that big tech tends to factor in the Indian perspective And many a time, what a year or so ago seemed like the Indian government trying to impose some form of, say, censorship or something along those lines, is now being seen for what it really is. And I think increasingly globally, especially in a year like 2024, which is full of elections, people are well aware of the risks that social media carries, misinformation, disinformation, and all of those, including for democratic societies, the kind of concern that it induces is something that everybody recognizes. And big tech is also recognizing. And they've been much more proactive in screening their content, in taking out things which cause user harm, very, very cooperative and actually proactive. So I think from that perspective, clearly, there is, I think, a shift in the way that they look at these things, and we can sense it. There are still issues. I mean, it's not that when you are interacting on such a broad sort of plane, and there are so many points of interaction, there are certainly issues. There are certainly areas where I think we need to be careful, particularly with large language models and so on. I think India is keen that we should not become guinea pigs where half-tested projects are kind of thrust on us or experimented, or we are experimented with that. Because in a country like India, which is a relatively young democracy, and in certain cases, certain things could cause problems of public order. I think the reality in India is a little different from other places. That's something that they recognize, and I think they also need to calibrate the way they do.
Thank you, sir. Now, moving on to the next quick question, without mentioning any names, governance and hygiene, be it corporate governance, be it basic hygiene, compliance with law and regulation, has been something that has caused problems for the digital and the platform economy, especially for Indian tech companies. Any sort of guidance, any kind of advice that you have for Indian tech platform and digital economy companies on that front?
I think as regulators, many regulators, and there are multiple regulators in India in this space,
Yes, sir.
and something we will also recognize in the Digital India bill when it comes together, is the need for regulatory sandboxing. While we balance the interest of innovation with the interest of consumer protection and various other requirements in terms of stability, etc., financial stability, etc., we will look at regulatory sandboxing to see that user harm is prevented while innovation is promoted. Um, it is in the nature of tech that it moves a little faster than where regulation moves. And I think what is needed is two things. One, a constant interaction between the regulators and the tech companies to figure out where we stand. Recently, the finance minister held a meeting with the fintech companies where I was also present, and she actually advocated that every month RBI as a regulator should meet the fintech companies, which I think is a very, very welcome measure. Likewise, we keep a constant interaction on various elements of the IT Act currently and the rules with the various tech companies. It's a constant dialogue which goes on. So that is one important element. The second element is to provide a regulatory sandbox within the regulation to make sure that they can experiment without causing too much of it.
Thank you, sir. Last question, sir. I have had the benefit of seeing the birth of the Information Technology Act. I've had the benefit of working with tech, telecom, broadcasting, media companies to see the evolution of the Information Technology Act. But what's really exciting for me personally, and I think for a lot of audience here who are part of the platform economy, is the Digital India Act that you talked about. Can you give us a quick update on anything, any insight that you can share on? We're all looking forward to that. So,
I can only say that it is in drafting. There are some drafts which are floating around saying that this is what the government is considering. I don't think those are actually drafts. We've had some rounds of discussion internally. We are trying to strengthen it with certain other elements. We are trying to look at ways in which we can. I mean, one big issue, if you look at it, is that when the IT Act was formulated, it was almost that internet intermediaries were an undifferentiated lot.
Yes, sir.
It's the
Correct.
same set of regulations which apply to all of them. And the understanding at that point is that they're just the plumbing, right? I mean, water or ideas just flow through the plumbing, so you can't
Correct.
hold the person
Correct.
responsible for what
Correct.
happens. But I think things have changed a lot. I think there are different kinds of intermediaries. Many intermediaries have greater control over what goes on. Some of them actually generate content of their own, sometimes through AI and so on. So I think we need to regulate it in a differentiated manner. That will be an important focus of the way that we need to think of what kind of intermediary protection would be available. It would really be a risk-based analysis, a tiered kind of thing, depending on what potential for harm is there and to what extent the intermediary actually mediates what is shared. Likewise, the loan apps and likewise all of those kind of applications also will naturally attract a higher level of attention. So these are some of the differentiations that we will think of. Cybersecurity will be a very important element of what we need to look at, because even if some of these assets are in the private sector, for the security of the country and for society as a whole, ensuring that cybersecurity is up to the mark is very important. So all of these aspects will really be addressed in the digital India.
Thank you, sir. We run out of time, but thank you very much. That's music to our ears. The IMAI Governing Council would be very happy to work with you and your government to bring the Digital India Act into life. So thank you very much for your time, sir. Really look forward to meeting you with you soon. Thank you very much.